Assalamu alaikum class, and welcome to week 3 of Physics, God is Force and Power. This week's lesson is going to be on force and understanding the greatest force. I'm really excited about this week's lesson because this is probably going to be the most physics that we do in this course. And so in this week's lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to analyze force and break down force and the quantities that make up force. It's a little bit different than what we did in the first week, because in the first week we did a very broad overview of force and the things that make up force, but we're going to break them down even further this week. And also we're going to discover what is the greatest force. So getting right into it, the Holy Quran states, "Recite that which has been revealed to thee of the book and keep up prayer. Surely prayer keeps one away from indecency and evil. And certainly the remembrance of Allah is the greatest force. And Allah knows what you do." And so here in the beginning, we see that the greatest force is the remembrance of Allah. And so what is the remembrance of Allah? Another word for the remembrance of Allah is prayer. So what this is saying is that prayer, or the remembrance of Allah, is the greatest force. So we're going to get back to that, but that's going to be the basis for our lesson. So now, moving on. Again, we state that force is a push or pull that acts upon an object as a result of its interaction with another object. Forces result from interactions. Some forces result from contact interactions, and other forces are the result of action at a distance interactions. And also, we went over last week the second law of motion, which states that the acceleration of an object as produced by a net force is directly proportional to the magnitude of the net force in the same direction as the net force and inversely proportional to the mass of the object. And from that statement, we get the equation of force is equal to mass times acceleration. And last week, when we went over the 3 laws of motion, or the first law of Allah, I forgot to put emphasis on the fact that the acceleration that an object experiences is in the same direction of the force that's applied to it. And the reason that's so important is because that goes into the nature of force, into the vector nature of force, because force is a vector, and a vector quantity is a quantity that is fully described by both magnitude and direction. So magnitude tells you how much, and direction tells you just that in what way is it pointing, in what direction that it's pointing. And so sometimes directions can be north, south, east, west. Sometimes directions could be based on degrees in an angular direction. Sometimes direction can be positive, negative, but force is going to be described based off of some point of reference, and it's going to point in a direction based off of that point of reference. And so force is a vector quantity as opposed to a scalar quantity. And so a scalar quantity is a quantity that is fully described by its magnitude. So where force is a vector, where force is going to be some magnitude pointing in some direction, scalar only has magnitude. So a scalar unit only tells you how much. And so an example of a scalar unit would be 1 nose, 2 feet, 3 cars. And so if you notice by that, I didn't say 3 feet pointing north, because that would be a vector quantity, but a scalar is just that it only tells you the magnitude or how much, and a vector is going to tell you how much and in what direction. And so again, force is equal to mass times acceleration. So mass is the amount of matter in an object, and mass is measured in kilograms. And so it's important not to confuse mass with weight. And so weight is actually a force. And so weight is equal to the mass of an object times the acceleration due to gravity. And so on different planets have different accelerations due to gravity. So your weight will be different on Earth as opposed to Mars and Jupiter. But your mass will always be the same no matter where you are in the universe, because the mass of an object refers to the amount of matter that is contained by the object. And next, acceleration is a vector quantity that is defined as the rate at which an object changes its velocity. So an object is accelerating if it is changing velocity. And the equation for acceleration is equal to the change in velocity divided by the change in time. And the units for acceleration are meters per second squared. And so when you hear acceleration, you might think of the accelerator in your car or the gas pedal. And so when you step on the accelerator in your car, it causes your car to speed up. And so when your car speeds up, it actually experiences acceleration. But also, you can experience acceleration by slowing down. Because in physics, acceleration is a change in velocity. So it doesn't matter if you're speeding up or slowing down, your velocity is changing. So therefore you are accelerating. But also you can experience acceleration by changing directions. So in order to understand how a change in direction can cause acceleration, you have to understand what is velocity. So velocity is a vector quantity that refers to the rate at which an object changes its position. And the equation for velocity is equal to displacement divided by time. And the units for velocity are meters per second. And so a velocity is just that the rate at which an object changes its position. And so you need to be careful not to confuse velocity and speed. Sometimes they're interchanged, but in physics it is a very specific thing. And so when you're referring to speed is a scalar quantity that refers to how fast an object is moving. And so again, a scalar quantity is going to tell you how much. And so an example of speed is 100 miles per hour. 100 miles per hour does not give you a direction, but it only gives you a rate. But with velocity, you can think of velocity as speed in a direction. So velocity is a vector. So in order to fully describe velocity, you need to have a speed and a direction. So it will be 100 miles per hour going east, 30 miles per hour going southwest, 30 miles per hour to the right, to the left. But it has to be some type of direction that's used to describe that speed, and that's what we call velocity. And in order to understand velocity, you have to understand time and displacement. So time is the measured or measurable period during which an action, process, or condition exists or continues. And time is measured in seconds. And so when we're talking about velocity, we're talking about a change in time. And so when we say time, we're really talking about a change in time or the period during which an action takes place. And so also you have to understand what is displacement. So displacement is an object's overall change in position. And the equation for displacement is equal to the final position minus the initial position. And it is measured in meters. So to better understand what I mean by displacement is an object's overall change in position, you can look at the image to the right, where line A shows the golf ball's original position at 0. Then on line B, it moves in the positive direction to 3 meters. And on line C, it moves in the negative direction of 4 meters. And so if I would ask you what is the object's overall displacement from A to C, the answer would actually be -4. And so that's why it's important to not confuse displacement with distance. So displacement is a vector quantity that refers to how far out of place an object is. And distance is a scalar quantity that refers to how much ground an object has covered during its motion. So the path of an object's overall displacement will always be a straight line or the shortest distance from point A to point B. So at this point, we've broken down force to its most fundamental quantities in units. So now let's recap. So far, we've learned what are vectors, and we learned the difference between vectors and scalars. We've learned the difference between mass and weight. We've learned the difference between velocity and speed, and also we learned the difference between displacement and distance. Also, we learned that mass is measured in kilograms, time is measured in seconds. Displacement is equal to the final position minus the initial position, which is measured in meters. Velocity is equal to displacement divided by the change in time, which is measured in meters per second. Acceleration is equal to the change in velocity divided by the change in time, which is measured in meters per second squared. And force is equal to mass times acceleration, which is kilograms times meters per second squared. And if you follow the logic of the equations, being that displacement is equal to the final position minus the initial position, or the change in position, and velocity is equal to displacement over the change in time, that would mean that acceleration is the change in position over time over time. So that shows you that acceleration is based off of position and time. So when you're looking at force, you're looking at mass, position, and time. Also, we've learned that force is a vector unit. And if we look here, we see that force is a vector unit because when you multiply a vector unit times, a vector quantity times a scalar quantity, your result or your product has to be a vector. So because mass is a scalar and acceleration is a vector, when you multiply the two, you get force, and therefore force is a vector. And also, you can experience, an object experiences acceleration when it changes velocity. And so in order to change velocity, you can either change the speed, change the direction, or you can change both. So now let's look at the spiritual implications of what we learned so far. So in the Holy Quran, in Surah 1, it reads, "In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Master of the day of requital. Thee do we serve, and thee do we beseech for help. Guide us on the right path, the path of those upon whom thou hast bestowed favors, not those upon whom wrath is brought down, nor those who go astray." In different translations of the Holy Quran, instead of guide us on the right path, sometimes it says guide us on the straight path. So I would ask the question, why would straight path and right path be synonymous? So if we overlay this image when we're looking at this prayer, if I gave you the option between the path of the displacement or the path taken, which one would you choose? Or which one would you say is the right path? Okay, just like I would think, I would say that the straight path is the right path. And I would say that if I had to choose between these two paths, I would choose the straight path because it is the shortest distance between point A and point B, and it would take the shortest amount of time to travel the straight path as opposed to traveling the long winding path. And so when we pray this prayer, because this surah is the oft-repeated prayer of the Muslims, when we pray this prayer, we're asking Allah to guide us on the straight path. So we're asking Allah to be the force that keeps us on the motion of this straight path. So we're asking Allah to push us in the direction that we want to go. So the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Message to the Black Man says, "What a good prayer for one who is lost from the right direction as the so-called Negroes to pray. The white race cannot regain paradise because they are not members of that family. But on the other hand, the lost found so-called Negroes are really by nature members of the original family of paradise. It was by prayer and turning in the right direction towards the holy temple Mecca that delivered Jonah from the belly of the fish." Jonah 2:2-4, which is only a type of us here in America, the anti-typical fish who has swallowed us. Our prayers will be speedily heard, and Allah will fight our battles against our enemies and bring them to disgrace. So in there, I'm going to give you a second and try to point out the physics that you see. Okay, so first we see direction, and we also see prayer. And as we remember from the beginning of our lesson, prayer, or the remembrance of Allah, is the greatest force. So we see a force, we see a direction, we see direction again, and then we also see speed. Okay, so what Allah is saying is that if you pray, you will speedily change directions. Okay, So also the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad says in the Message to the Black Man, this prayer, again, speaking of Surah 1 of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha, this prayer is found in the first surah chapter of the Holy Quran, and it is the opening of every surah of the Holy Book except the ninth chapter, the chapter of the hypocrites. He seeks the right guidance. He does not walk in the path of the Jews and Christians. He saw the Jews go astray from the right faith and caused the wrath of Allah to descend upon them and caused the Jews to suffer many afflictions and finally the loss of world independence. And they fell into the hands of their enemies wherever they sojourned. And further in that same section, he says, he wants us to be guided on the path of the prophets of Allah, where he can receive the favors of Allah. So again, we have this image of the path of the overall displacement versus the path taken. And so when we look at this path, doesn't this path remind you of the path that the children of Israel took? And they wandered around in the desert for 40 years for a trip that should have been really short if they had only followed the straight path or the right path. So going back to Surah Al-Fatiha, and another thing that we see in there is time, because it says the master of the day of requital. So we are even given a time factor or a period of time during which these events take place. So we have speed and direction. So speed and direction is what? Velocity. And then a change in velocity is acceleration. So we're asking Allah to change our path from the wrong path and keep us from going on the wrong path to the right path. So by changing direction, we are experiencing an acceleration, because we're changing our velocity by changing our direction, and we're experiencing acceleration. And again, the mass is our condition. So that mass times the acceleration. So the force of prayer pushes us in the direction that we want to go. So also, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad says, let us give praise to our God and submit ourselves to the Lord of the worlds and learn how to pray the right prayers in the right manner. Let us serve the one true God, whose proper name is Allah, in the right state. And so what is the right state? The right state is the right state of mind. The right state is the right state of being. But also, I would like to say that the right state, again, is the right state of motion. And as we learned last week, is that your state of motion is not only defined by your speed at which you're going, but it's also defined by the direction in which you're traveling. Well, you might say, Sister Gabrielle, you're reaching a bit, because it doesn't matter what direction or what position you're in when you're praying. It's only the prayers that count. But I would like to bring our attention to the words of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Message to the Black Man, where he says, what better preparation could have been made for the service of our God? With due respect and honor, he is turned in the direction of the sunrise, in which our planet is carrying him at the speed of 1,037 1/3 miles per hour. Physically, he has turned his face in the direction which he is traveling and in which he looks forward to the light of day. From the same direction, sunrise, came all the spiritual light, the holy prophets, the holy land, and the holy cities of the earth. Well, when the messenger is talking about the speed at which you're traveling, he's talking about the speed at which the earth rotates around its axis. And because the earth is a sphere, and when you're traveling on the course of in a circular path of a sphere, you're constantly changing the angle at which you're traveling. And so as you're traveling in a circular motion around the axis of the earth, you're actually constantly accelerating. So again, we have speed and we have direction, which gives us velocity. And then we also have a constant change in position or direction, which gives us acceleration. And again, we have our force, which is the force of prayer. So, and again, we have ourselves and our condition. Force equals mass times acceleration. So again, in the message to the black man, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad says, come to success. Prayer and obedience to Allah will bring you success. The prayer is recited standing erect with face towards the east, with hands raised and declaring to the one God, Allah, that he has turned himself to Allah God, the originator of the heavens and the earth. This prayer and positions are especially designed and worded for the lost sheep, the so-called Negroes, who have been lost from the knowledge of their God and people, and now declare that they are turned again to their God, Allah, and are upright to him. So at this point, I would like to say, I believe you get the point. You see the physics is starting to come out at you, where before you might not have had the base, you might not have had the vocabulary and the understanding to be able to see the physics in all of this. But again, the physics we are proving with our tool set that we have in physics, and we're using our mathematical theology in the proper term, and we're seeing and proving that what the messenger is telling us is 100% correct, because we can prove it using mathematics. We have a set of equations that we see over and over again that are coming from the words of the messenger. So I would like to leave us with the words of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad again in the message to the black man. We must study the words and the different positions taken by the Muslims in his daily prayers. This helps us understand the better true way to worship Allah God. And so if he already told us that prayers are success, and by studying the different positions in the words of the prayer, then this helps us better understand, this helps us to understand better the true way to worship Allah. The better we understand the prayer and what's its meaning in the different positions, the more we can extract and draw on that greatest force, which is prayer. So, assalamu alaikum again, and thank you.